I think we are live. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Neil with BIKEPACKING.com. And today I have two awesome special guests. I want to introduce ultra endurance athlete Lael Wilcox and Rene Herse founder Jan Heine. How are we?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We haven't done too many of these so far. We've done a bunch of the unpacking series. So thank you so much for obviously being here for one of our first live sessions, which is super exciting. And it's for an awesome idea that Lael and Jan kind of picked out together, designing a tire kind of based around Lael's needs, desires, and wants. And we'll get into that here in a second. But Jan, let's start with you. How are you doing? I guess, where are you located first off? And what do you do for a living?
What do I do for a living? Just like Lael and you, I ride bikes. We are Rene Herse Cycles, used to be Compass Cycles. We'll get into that probably a little bit later. We make bike parts. We sell bike parts. We publish a magazine, Bicycle Quarterly, where Lael wrote a great story in the last issue, and I think there's one coming in the future. We're in Seattle, so we are sort of in the epicenter where this whole epidemic started in the US, but we've been pretty lucky that it hasn't got too bad. Yeah.
Awesome. And Lael, how are you faring with the current pandemic? You were in Tucson and I think, or somewhere in Arizona, and then now you're back in Alaska?
Exactly. Yeah, I was in Tucson and just came back to Alaska about 10 days ago. All the events and plans kind of got changed, but I'm back up here to continue a project of, or actually make a video about a project I did in 2017 when I rode all the roads in Alaska. But when it was just me, it was like very minimal photos, really just my experience. So I'm going back with Rue to document the terrain and share the story. And I'm just so happy to be home. You know, it's these huge stretches, nobody out there, tons of animals. I saw a bear, a moose, and a porcupine all yesterday on a ride home. You know, it's just wild, amazing.
Yeah.
So everything's good.
Cool. Awesome. Are you upset that most races probably aren't happening in the next month or so, at the very least?
Are you?
Yeah.
Neil had great plans for the Tour Divide. You're going to go head on.
Yeah. You were too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think there were a bunch of people chomping at the bit for that, but I guess it is what it is, you know. I'm trying to not get my hopes up too much about anything, really just enjoy the riding I get to do. And I mean, it kind of brings you back to why we all do this in the first place. You know, it's like the records will be there. You just have to go after them later.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good answer. All right, Jan. So how's the business doing with the current situation? How have you had to adapt, I guess, with COVID-19?
Well, I mean, we were lucky, so to speak, that we are considered an essential business because you know, people need to ride their bikes to work and to all kinds of places. But that also puts a lot of responsibility on us on acting, you know, in a way that doesn't cause further spread of this. So we've sort of staggered our shifts. There's no more than one person in the office in the warehouse at a time, which means I usually get the night shift. So I get to work until midnight, which is not always that much fun. But what can you do? You know, I mean, we're lucky that we're all healthy. We're lucky that that we can continue to run the company and don't have to lay off anybody or stuff. But yeah, it's, you know, it's not a normal situation, and we all wish it were.
Yeah. So how long have you been around? Have you been in Seattle the whole time? And I guess what do you make other than tires, or what? Is there anything else you guys make other than tires?
We make a lot of stuff. But basically, I mean, the company started with Rene Herse in 1938. He was a aircraft builder and mechanic. Yeah, you can do the first photo of him.
Yeah,
share that. But and he loved basically what we call bikepacking nowadays, you know, going into the mountains with some camping gear. And he figured he wanted better bikes. He wanted lighter bikes. More reliable bikes, and he figured he knew everything about aircraft and the technology was there, so somebody had to make it, and he did. And so with his friends, they explored all the roads in the Alps, and Then when you fast forward, I mean, here in Seattle, you can do the fourth one first. We have amazing terrain.
Yeah.
If you go to the very last one, that was just last weekend where we headed up one more.
This one?
That one, yes. Where we just headed out of town. I mean, this is 30 miles out of town, and we're at Drunken Charlie Lake, and the sun is setting. We saw a black bear too. Fortunately, it was about a mile from camp, so we weren't too concerned, but we still had to hang all our food from the trees and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I started as a road racer, but I always loved the mountains. And so we discovered these roads that didn't go anywhere, or sometimes went places nobody had been, and started exploring them. But back in the early 2000s, there were no bikes for this kind of stuff. And at the same time, I had done some research on these French riders, and I realized they had the answers because they had been doing this kind of riding. And so I met Lael Herse, who is in the third photo with the car. And sorry about that. And researched the story, asked them questions, said, "Oh my gosh, you need smaller gears, you need tires that are basically racing tires, but that are much, much wider than anything you can buy today." And sort of their eyes started to gleam and glisten because somebody came and asked about the stuff they loved, but that had fallen by the wayside in the 50s and 60s when the Tour de France and racing and all that stuff took over. And so here I came and said, "Hey, I don't want to know about world champions. I want to know about what it was like when you climbed the Tourmalet in the middle of the night and under the stars and that kind of stuff." And they said, "Oh my gosh, finally somebody's asking." And so we realized we needed some different parts. We started making some, importing some. This was, we started Campus Cycles in 2007. And, every time I went to France, I visited Lily, and, we talked and asked her about all the secrets sort of that they knew. How do you make better tires? How do you make better parts? How did all this work? And one day she said, "I'm really sad Rene Herse isn't going to continue because she had no heirs." And basically she said, "Would you be interested in taking this over?" And it's a convoluted story because at the time I wasn't ready. So it went to a friend and then came back to me. But here's the end result, that we basically changed Campus Cycles to Rene Herse Cycles because we really want to honor the inspiration, these people who did amazing things and who've really inspired us from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And that happened, a few years ago or last year or something like that, the name change?
The company... Oh, the name change was a year and a half ago. Okay. She sold the company in 2007, and we bought it, I forget, 2011 or something like that. And for a while, there were the two brand names, and it was kind of confusing. And we finally decided, okay, we are going to be Rene Herse. Cool. That's it.
Awesome. And
so what else do we make? Obviously, we make tires. We make a lot of parts, handlebars for long distance riding that have a little more generous curves so that you can move your hands around. Cranks with compact gearing before compact gearing existed. A lot of small things, basically stuff that we need for our rides that nobody else is making.
Awesome. And is it just you? How many employees do you have?
No, we are 5 here in Seattle, and then we have an engineer in Taiwan because most of the manufacturing these days is done there. You can't forge a crank in the US anymore because they only make aircraft parts, and they laugh at our numbers and at our everything, So you need to go where the bike industry is. And then we have a bunch of freelancers who, we don't have a full-time photographer and things like that. So we work with people here and there. And then we have people who are, semi-volunteers. I have a bit of a university background, so it's quite useful if we need to calculate, the noise cancellation issues. They're good people who love doing that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
And they're very useful. And
I bet.
I appreciate them a lot. So.
I can imagine. Cool. So I guess where did both of your where did you guys cross paths or meet? And I guess where did the whole Fleecer Ridge idea kind of come from?
Yeah, I mean, Jan reached out. I think I was just talking with Rue about this. I think it was early 2018 with a prototype.
Like, I mean, I'd always known about Lael, of course. Everybody knows Lael.
Oh boy, yeah, right. But he had a prototype for a 55 millimeter tire. And I was like, oh, and then we talked on the phone about it. And, that's about the range that I want for bike packing in general. So he sent some, but they were a really nice, lightweight, supple tire. And I was like, I love riding this, but I'm just going to thrash it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I just don't know if I can trust that for the distance. So then we kind of continued this conversation of like, can we build a tire with a thicker sidewall, a little heavier duty, something you could trust for thousands of miles? And that's where the conversation started. And it was all geared towards what would be the best for the Tour Divide. What do you want there? What features? But it's like, so I was just riding super heavy tires because I'm like, well, I won't get any flats, but then, they're not as much fun to ride. And then it also, over time, you're expending more energy to ride that. So there has to be some kind of compromise. Sure. And not a lot of people are focused on that specific need. So to work together to find a solution for, a niche sport, but something that more people could benefit from was a really cool project.
Cool.
Yeah, for us, it was really fun to get that perspective. I mean, I'm coming from a racing background. I race cyclocross. It's a half-hour race. Even if I go on a ride in the Cascades for 600 miles or so, that's still something that I can do on an extra light tire because I know the terrain, and so on. But I can see, for Lael, if at 2 a.m. somewhere out on the mountain pass on day 10 of the Tour Divide, she cuts a sidewall and has to boot it and, and so on, it's going to be such a huge problem. And so that was really, great to get that feedback and also just hear firsthand what are the conditions of the Tour Divide.
Right.
Back when I started getting interested in it, people were riding mountain bikes, flat handlebars and stuff. And so I thought, well, it seems like, drop bars would be better. Then, people like Lael started riding drop bars on their bikes. But where is that compromise? And so I think that was really fruitful, where Lael told us what she wanted. And we thought, we can do that. And sometimes we even try to do a little more.
Yeah, make it better. My expectations are sometimes kind of low. I'm like, it's so mentally crushing to have a mechanical or have a problem out there. It's like to kind of get the positive energy back after something like that. I'm like, I just can't do that. So sometimes I'm like, I'll just go heavier weight. But then, over time that really wears on you and it doesn't feel great. So it's been nicer to ride higher performance, higher quality equipment. Everything's better. I mean, now it's like both you and I, Neil, are running more electronic shifting. That's something you're like, oh, that's something could go wrong. But it actually works really well almost all the time. So you're like, okay, let's just continue with that. It's so much better on your hands. I mean, you just have to make some compromises for having nicer equipment. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I guess.
I think go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Our job is to make those compromises as little as possible. How can we make a stronger tire that still rolls fast? Anybody can make a strong tire that's slow. That's
right.
Just add rubber and make the thread thicker and so on. But how can we make it so that we maintain most of the speed? I mean, we don't send you out on an extra light unless you climb Mount Lemmon and you are, super excited about that. For the Tour Divide, how can we make something that is exactly that compromise, but less compromise than most people probably think?
Yeah. So I guess what are like the characteristics then, Lael, that you're looking at or looking for when you are riding the Great Divide mountain bike route or racing the Tour Divide or some other rugged route that's mostly road oriented?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of crazy thing about the Tour Divide is that it's really all gravel riding, but it's just so much of it. It's so long, you're out there for a minimum of 2 weeks that you just get so beat up over time that you definitely want a higher volume tire than a gravel tire. So I'm looking for something like around 2.2 inch range. And then I'm like, okay, I want it to be pretty fast rolling, but still have some tread because you are on dirt and because you're riding through the night. So it's like you want something a little more forgiving. Yeah. And then in addition to that, it's like, okay, fast rolling, pretty good flat protection because I just don't want to deal with mechanicals, a durable tire because if anything, I'll change out my rear tire and steamboat springs, halfway through the route. But otherwise, I just want to run the same setup the whole way. So those are like the main points. And then for me, it's like I'm riding a Specialized Epic hardtail with a drop bar. So the rear tire clearance was kind of tight. And then I just started stressing out about that before last year's Tour Divide. I was like, if I run a 2.2 and then I get stuck in mud, it's going to wear holes through my chainstays. And, I'm freaking out because I did that in 2015. I wore a hole that I could fit my pinky into. I didn't notice until after the ride. Oh my God. I had like ridden through this mud. It wasn't even that bad. It was like southern Montana. I just kept riding, and then I was like cleaning up the bike to sell it, and then all this little dirt starts crumbling out, and I was like, oh my God.
And there was a hole in your
hole, and I was like, oh my God. And then I'm super sad because I'm like, I was supposed to sell this bike. I have no income, but I got the frame warranted. But then I come back to it and I'm like, I can't do this again. I'm like, so then I was running like a 42 in the rear, and that's not ideal.
No.
It's too rough for that. But I was like, okay, then I have tire clearance. So then my ideal, I was like, I want a 55 in the front and a 48 in the rear. And I want it to have these, qualities. So then I was working directly with Jan for that. Also because you start finding holes in the tire market. You're like, this stuff there actually aren't any options.
Mm-hmm.
It's either like super light or super heavy. There's very little in between, especially not for performance. It's like, you could get like a medium weight kind of crummy tire, but that's not really good at anything. So, it was kind of, when you start trying to fill needs of something very specific, you just like go down that tunnel,
Oh yeah. Have you ever had to replace a tire out there?
No. From like mid-ride?
Yeah, like from
a cut?
A cut or some drastic measure, something happened out there, not by choice.
Never on the Tour Divide.
Okay.
That happened to me on the Trans Am a couple times.
Sure.
And then also on the Baja Divide. I think that's it though. I've been pretty lucky. And then, you could always limp along, but that's also wastes a ton of time.
Yeah.
The Baja Divide, I was like trying to fix this puncture with or sidewall cut with super glue, and I was just like dabbing it on. I was like, okay, and then just praying, because I'm like in the middle of nowhere. There's nowhere to buy a tire.
Yeah,
like, absolutely not. And I'm running like a 29 by 2.6.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck, even if you got somewhere, they wouldn't have it. So I guess you just have to start with stuff you really think is going to last the duration. Have you?
Not on the Divide. I've replaced a tire on the Arizona Trail. I've slashed a sidewall, and then I had to keep it tubeless. I was like, all right, well, I got to sew it, and then I've got to put a ton of super glue in it, and put some more stands in it, and rub it with dirt and kind of like coagulate the sidewall and make sure it was sealing. But it was a brand new tire, and that was the thing that got me because. And this was in 2013.
Couldn't trust it.
Yeah, brand new tire, just super fresh sidewall. And I feel like, and maybe this is a good question for Jan, but is there like a break-in period for tires in general where you like almost feel like the sidewall is like sticky?
There's a little bit. I mean, you don't want to ride a tire that just came out of the mold unless it's one that I sent to Lael because it's a prototype and, we had it air shipped over here and it still smells like rubber and whatnot. But usually it's like a month or so. So by the time the tires arrive in Seattle, they're cured fully. Not really. I mean, it's all luck, I was laughing because I have a memory of riding a reinforced, tire way back before we knew about supple tires. And just on the road, on one of the cross-state races that we used to do here, I slashed it in half and I finished the ride. First, I put a dollar bill in because I had read in some magazine it worked. It blew right through. So then I put a Cliff Bar wrapper in, and I can tell you, Cliff Bar wrappers are way stronger than dollar bills. I even put a $5 bill in, thinking, it might be stronger than the $1, but no. But the Cliff Bar wrapper lasted for a whole week after that. But it was bulging out a bit and not ideal. But that was a really tough time. It was just bad luck. I never found what I ran over. It was just a clear cut, as if I had ran over a razor blade or something.
Wow, interesting. Yeah,
it happens,
Yeah, maybe I just got unlucky. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the stronger the sidewall is, the less likely it's going to happen. But in the end, there's no insurance.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's good to know. So Jan, I guess what would be the process then? All right. So Lael has this idea about bringing a tire an idea or whatnot to you. do you get to do you start sketching out tires, or do you just use like the resources you have, maybe past tires? Like how do you end up actually pulling her design ideas and put them on paper?
Well, we started out with our first knobby before that, and I've raced cyclocross, and we have these FMB tubulars here, which are just amazing. It's like you can see how supple this is. I mean, there's almost no tire there. It's like riding on the air. And one of the reasons I'm racing cyclocross is because I can ride these tires. It's almost the only reason, but they were awful on pavement, and every cross course has about 50 yards of pavement, and you're like riding on raw eggs, like the bike is moving right and left, and you're like, okay, soon I'll get on dirt again and I can accelerate. And I was thinking, this is ridiculous. I should be accelerating on the pavement. There's less resistance and so on. So can we make a tire that grips in the mud, which we have plenty here in Seattle, and still rides well on pavement? And so I thought about it, and it's all a question of knob size and knob arrangement. You want, knobs need to be small enough that they dig into the mud, but they need to be large enough that they don't squirm. And the typical cross, mountain bike knobs are really small, so they squirm a lot. And nobody had really examined how small or how big you can make a knob. So what's the maximum size? And is there basically an intersection where the maximum size for digging into the mud is large enough that it doesn't squirm anymore? And so we calculated, and we thought this could work. We made some prototypes, and it did work. I mean, you've probably seen the photos of us leaning those tires into corners, and they ride almost like slick tires. So that was a good starting point, because for a multi-surface ride, and that's what we do here. I live in Seattle, so if I ride from home, I'm going to be on pavement for at least 50 miles. And you don't want to ride that FMB on pavement, because all the knobs will be gone by the end, and it's no fun. So, and there's so many rides where you don't even know what's going to happen. Is like, it might be all dry, and you could be on a road tire. But what if you have 2 miles of snow in the middle somewhere, still left over, or it's muddy or something, and suddenly you want that knobby tire. So we wanted a more road-oriented knobby tire. That was our starting point. And then Lael comes and says, hey, I want the fast tire, I want the tire, and so on. And I'm thinking, well, we almost have that tire. We just need to make it last the Tour Divide. We need to make it the right width for Lael, the right strength. I was thinking about what sort of demands does she have on the tire. She's not going to run into rocks, willfully, but at night you don't see where you're going. So clearly you're going to hit stuff. And so you need a completely different tire for that. And so that's where it all started. And then we just try to improve the tires more, because I read all these stories or see the video, and they're riding into town, descending mountain passes on pavement to resupply. And, I want you to have a tire there that rides like a road tire if we can. It's not necessary to be, wobbling around and sort of, that was our goal basically. Okay.
And I guess as far as like prototyping and testing, like what does that process look like? So you get the tire back from overseas, and then do you like just put them on right away and go out for a ride, or do you look at them, or what do you do? And then I guess, do you run them tubeless, or do you put tubes in them? Like, how does that look?
Whatever. Often we put tubes in just because we want to ride now, and we don't want to, push around tubeless sealant and so on. But the main thing is, just ride them. And it's always a surprise, because a tire is not something you can prototype without investing in the mold. So you can't just make a one-off. With a crank or something, we can CNC machine at least something. We can even do a 3D print, for example. And it's not quite as strong, but at least for riding around the block, we can try it. With tire, you can't. You can only you can cheat. We once did, and I can show you that. We wanted to figure out what it would be like if we made a mountain bike tire with a road racing casing, basically that FMB casing, but with a mountain bike tire. And so we had this made, and then we wanted to see how it handles on the road, because this is a mountain bike tread. And so the engineers at our supplier made basically from their mountain bike mold with a road materials tire, which we then had shaved. And there's a photo of Peter Weigel, a good friend and frame builder, who shaved these tires and made slicks for us. You can still, well, not on this, but you can still see the knob sort of. And you can show, I think it's number 4, the guy with the gas mask shaving tires.
Yeah, let's see. 1 second.
That's so funny.
Boom,
There he-
shaving tires.
Shaving tire. So he's taking a knobby tire and removes the knob so that we can try, because back then nobody had ever ridden a road racing tire in a 55 millimeter width. It's like, does it even work? What happens? It could be like a basketball, perhaps the bike just bouncing down the road or something. We had no clue. So we could, and I didn't want to invest, tens of thousands of dollars into tire mold just to try this out and say, oh, it didn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then once we had these prototypes, we realized it does work. We can do it.
Yeah.
Then we invested into the molds. But there's always still, quite a risk if you mess up and you make a tread profile, for example, where the knobs are too close and it clogs up with mud.
Mm-hmm.
You're stuck. I mean, you start from zero again if you want to redo it. And same thing, if your knobs are too close or too far apart and the tire sort of is stumping around because it just knob sort of hits the road independently. It's sort of a black art. There's a lot of calculation involved, but you can't predict everything.
No.
Right.
Okay, good to know.
I was really excited when Lael, emailed and said, "Hey, these tires are
they're awesome. They're
Sweet.
great." But that's, I don't know. I'm just fascinated hearing this process, because then it's like you're imagining factories, imagining molds. Like that's such a different world that I live in. So cool. I love it.
Can I ask, was Fleecer Ridge like a one and done? Did you like hit the nail on the head there, and was it like a perfect tire the first one you got, or did you have to make some adjustments?
What do you think, Lael?
I think it's ready to go.
All right.
Well, we did, again, Peter shaved some other tires for us where we varied the knob thickness, because we wanted to see, like, where is the optimal knob thickness. Obviously, in mud and snow, you want the biggest knob you can to dig as deep as you can, displace as much material as you can. But on the road, what happens? Where does the tire get slower and so on? Where does it start squirming? So we experimented a lot with different knob heights without actually investing in so many tire molds, just making one with pretty tall knobs and then shaving it down consecutively. And
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beauties of working with of being part of the scene, so to speak. We know Lael, we know Peter Weigel, we have these resources that often bigger companies don't immediately have. They have to make a new mold before they can test a different knob. Whereas we can just say, hey, can you shave some more tires for us? And, he gets out his belt sander and puts on his gas mask. And, he says it parks a car in the driveway so nobody comes and disturbs him while he's, grinding these tires down.
Awesome.
Oh, my God. Amazing.
And so we're really, really lucky that we have this sort of network of people to work with. And having Lael in that is great too. And it was really fun to, call her. And it's sort of, we lived in these parallel worlds and we knew of each other, but we'd never really spoken. So that was really cool. Like, finally, I get to meet you.
Yeah, amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's great info. I've always been curious, so thank you for that. All right, Lael. So a question for you. Obviously, first off, can you explain Fleecer Ridge to the viewers, especially the ones that haven't ever been up there? And how important was it for you to kind of think about a tire or potentially design a tire that had, or at least provide feedback that had something that could hook up in corners really well, and not necessarily just roll really well?
Well, okay, so Fleecer Ridge is going north to south on the divide. It's probably the steepest descent of any of the passes. It goes into a little town called Wise River. Beautiful climb, also steep towards the top of the climb, but then just an incredible descent. And actually, I walked the first, 500 meters of it going down or so. Maybe not that far, but it's so steep that I was like, I'm not riding this. The thing for me is like, you think about the time you're spending all the time when you're doing an endurance event. It's like you're stopping to pee. You're thinking about time like, oh, I better switch my water bottles. I better move stuff around on my bike. I should put a jacket on. It's like kind of obsessive multitasking. But then I'm like on a descent. I'm like, if I'm sleep deprived and I'm kind of out of it and I'm not feeling it, I'm not just going to roll this, because if I crash, I'll spend an extra hour dealing with that. and maybe do something to my equipment. So
Or body,
it's all about like making good choices, along the way. Like I think of the ultimate time goal, what's the fastest I can do this? And then what are the best choices I can make, and then that all kind of feeds into your overall result, which, not all moments are romantic and glamorous. In fact, they're quite the opposite. You're like, rolling out of a bivy bag on the side of the road and you're like, okay, let's get going. It just is not like this beautiful sunrise moment. It's like, whoa, like I hope I don't see anybody for a few hours.
That's funny.
So, I mean, like, that's generally what I'm thinking about for all the gear choices, and they're not all cool. It's like grips with bar ends and an arrow bar and all this goofy stuff. It's like, it's not exactly used for the design purpose for those kinds of things. It's like more for comfort, not for aerodynamics, and so I guess what I'm looking for generally in equipment is like, what's actually going to work for me when I'm out there. For me, it might be different for others. But then it's like, that's usually, I guess, because you're taking equipment, you're trying to make all this other equipment work for bike packing, which it wasn't designed for that. There haven't been a lot of bike packing designs, maybe because it's such a small sport. But then, I don't know, I guess more people are getting into bike pack touring and gravel riding. And then there's this like intersection where those are kind of the same terrain, really. On a bike packing setup, you might be going more for comfort and you're carrying more stuff. So there's more weight involved, but generally you're riding the same roads. Yeah. So, I guess I'm just looking for something that works for that. But I guess I'm not imagining flying around corners. Sure. Generally, I'm like, I just want to make it down safely and keep going.
For sure. And I think it's funny, like whenever I get into the groove of like a race or something like that, I feel like I just get more comfortable on my tires.
God, it's true.
And it's just like, it's kind of like Zen. So having something that can just corner really well is just really nice to have.
You also just get this crazy connection with your bike because you're on it so much that you're like, I find like new pedal strokes. I'm like, whoa, that's cool. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you just get kind of so involved, or I'll find myself like descending in the aero bars.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like, kind of dangerous, but it's like, I've done this. Like, I feel good.
And it's so like, kind of
I can see it.
You wish something was out there capturing those moments, though, because it probably looks so funny.
Yeah.
That's great.
That is awesome.
Yeah, so, our goal is, of course, to give you the equipment for that. Like, you're saying you're getting into the groove, you're feeling your tires. We want a tire that doesn't have abrupt transitions. Like, if you look the Fleecer Ridge here, it's got a round profile so that you don't suddenly, like a real mountain bike tire has more of a square profile, so it climbs out of ruts better. But if you lean it into corners, you're getting very variable grip depending on the angle that the tire attacks the road. Whereas with this, more like a road tire, it's always the same. And then it's hard to see. Yeah. I'm sorry, the light here is not so good. But we also made the knobs very staggered so that you always have the same amount of knobby, both when you're on pavement, the same amount of rubber on the road, but also when you're on dirt, gravel, mud, snow, you always have the same amount of traction. Because one thing that I've always hated about many knobbies is you lean them a little further and suddenly all your traction is gone. And, you slip or something. And, so for a ride, like Lael says, it's not a mountain bike ride, and we're certainly not mountain bike specialists, so I wouldn't make a mountain bike tire. But for something where Lael said, well, this is a gravel ride, I'm thinking, well, we've been making tires for gravel riding for, more than 10 years. We've started riding gravel in the Cascades here 20 years ago almost. But, we want to give you the equipment that gives you that confidence of getting into the zone.
Awesome. You kind of started getting into my next question, Jan, but no, it's totally fine. I think that's a great segue here. So when I was doing research back in, I don't know, maybe 2014, when I knew that I was going to do the Tour Divide. Let's do this. Sorry. So back in 2014, when I knew I was going to do the Tour Divide, I was looking for a tire that would roll really well, because all the people that I was talking to were telling me, all right, well, you want like a continuous center tread. So I actually rode in 2015 on the Divide. I used some Maxxis cross marks, which are basically like a square that run down the middle. It doesn't really shed mud down the middle at all, but it rolls really well. So I guess how important is that in your process, but how important is the kind of the continuous tread pattern that the Fleecer Ridge has? And I'm going to actually share that right now.
Yeah. Well, the continuous center tread is more like a early mountain bike thing, when mountain bikes were mostly ridden on the road and they were trying to make tires that look like mountain bike tires, but really didn't quite perform like mountain bike tires. Because realistically, continuous or not doesn't matter. What matters is how much squirm you get off the tread blocks. When you look at the car tire, it's not continuous tread. So what we do instead is we make the tread blocks big enough that they don't squirm, and we put enough of them on the road in a staggered way that you always have the same amount of rubber touching the road, so you're not bumping from one knob into a void onto the next knob into a void. And so we can achieve the same thing functionally as far as rolling resistance, while giving you real knobs in the center so you get the traction. Because it doesn't make sense to me that the part that has the most pressure on the road or on the trail has the least amount of traction, because the knobs on the side are not really engaged unless your tire really sinks in very, very deep. So I think it was just a sort of, I don't want to say lack of imagination, but people hadn't really realized yet how to optimize the size of the knobs and how to make it so that you could have knobs and yet have no squirm. I mean, the most amazing experience for me with these tires, not the Fleecer Ridge, but the early knobbies we had, was on a road ride. I went on a fast Saturday morning road ride on these tires, and I gave them to a friend and said, we usually switch bikes, we're same height and so on, which is great for testing. He said, why would I ride a knobby tire on a fast road ride in the pace line? I said, give it a try. And we switched bikes back and forth. We were the same strength, same height, same weight, and we're almost clones of each other. And we were the same speed, whether we were on the knobbies or not. And it's just like, this shouldn't be. Everybody knows knobbies are slow, but they aren't. And I think it's just when you really dissect what makes a knobby slow and you eliminate all those factors, you can come up with something that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And so I would assume that being able to keep those treads like at the perfect distance really helps accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the juggling. We are working, we can't make the blocks bigger because then they don't dig in the mud. We can't make them smaller so they would squirm. We need to keep the negative space in between big enough so that they don't clog up with mud. We need to keep the knobs close enough together so that it doesn't have that dum 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 thing. There's a lot of juggling going on, which is also why we can't just scale the size. Like, if we make a 48, maybe someday, because Lael says she really needs it. So, we can't just take the Fleecer Ridge and say, okay, we'll just shrink it, 12.5% or something, because it doesn't work. The knobs, if they're 12.5% smaller, will start squirming and, bad things happen. So each of these tires is sort of a completely individual design.
Cool. And then, so is that specific design more quiet than, say, a regular knobby then? Or is that something completely different that you do, or is that a completely different technology?
It's both. I mean, we just announced today that, we use basically noise canceling with this tire. What's happening, first of all, of course, making the knobs staggered and making one knob touch the ground at a time means that the noise is less. Because you can imagine if you have, 5 people drumming, if they're all drumming at the same time, in sync, it's hugely loud. If one hits the drum, then dun 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 dun. It's much different from boom boom boom. Yeah. And so that's how the knobbies work too, both for speed, because if all the knobs hit at the same time, you get that sort of where the wheel isn't really round anymore. You're almost like on a polygon with many corners for each knob. And then we started thinking, well, since we have these knobs already staggered, can't we try to figure out a way that the wavelength frequencies that these knobs create, the sound waves, start canceling each other out? And of course, you can't do it totally. For that, you would need what's called active noise cancellation, which is a microphone that basically measures what noise you have, and then plays through some speakers, the frequencies that basically fill in the valleys and troughs, so that you have silence again. But still, it's quite a bit quieter. I think Lael was surprised when she first got the tires, because she said, "What did you do?"
Yeah, they're way quieter. Actually, I just put the tires on and I was just riding it, commuting around town. So it's like, oh, the bike's ready to go. Just ride it around on the bike path, and it was basically silent, And then I didn't even think about it. I wasn't like, oh, whoa, these are quiet. You don't think about something until something's wrong, or until it annoys you. If everything works perfectly, you're like, oh, this is normal. This is great.
It should be. I mean, I think that's the key thing in all these long rides. You don't want to think about the bike.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess getting into casing and whatnot, I guess, Jan, another question for you. Why is it so important for you, and why casing in general, and how, obviously being a tire manufacturer, that's probably the answer, but why?
No, being a rider.
Yeah. How does that translate to this term supple? Like, what is supple?
I have to take some responsibility. Nobody was talking about supple until I talked to the old guys from Rene Herse, and I said, you should have seen the tires of the 1940s and 50s. They had these supple casings, and you would think that the big, 42 millimeter tire would be slow, but you wouldn't believe how well these things rolled. And I thought, that sounds like what I need. We're riding on gravel roads, and you sort of had the choice of underbiking on a 28 millimeter racing tire and hoping for the best and keeping your fingers crossed, or riding some touring mountain bikey tire that just like, it felt like pedaling through molasses for me, especially coming from the road racing background. I mean, I love the bike to feel light and sort of alive under you, and so I wanted that on gravel. And clearly it's the casing that matters. That's why those cyclocross tires are so great. And so I can walk you through the casings that we offer.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Basically, people always focus on width, on all kinds of stuff. But for speed, for comfort, the casing is really what matters, because that's how much energy it absorbs, first of all, as it rolls. So that's the rolling resistance, but also how much vibrations it transmits, which is what's called the suspension losses, which is also energy loss. Because if the bike vibrates, if you're uncomfortable on the bike, that's all energy loss. It's all friction in your body, on the bike, in your equipment. So if we can reduce the vibrations, we gain on two sides. One, we reduce the energy that's absorbed in the tire. The tire doesn't get as hot, so to speak. But two, the body of the rider and everything also doesn't get hot. And anything that gets hot is energy lost. So here, for example, we have our, let's do it this way, the extra light casing. And you can see how, really, how really supple it is. There's very little there. It's got super fine threads. They're slightly loose weaves, so that they're very, very flexible. Basically, it's when you ride the tire, it's almost as if there's no tire. You're just riding on air. Our standard casing is a little stronger, a little less expensive too. So it uses slightly thicker threads. It's it's still very, very, very supple by most people's standards, but not quite the same as our extra light. Then we have the endurance casing, and that one is interesting because it's basically as supple as the as supple as the standard casing, but it's way stronger. And how that's achieved is it takes the same superfine threads of the extra light, pushes them closer together for a denser weave, and then puts a puncture-proof layer underneath the sidewall and underneath the tread. So you get a tire that has a lot of speed, but still has a lot of puncture, cut, and so on resistance. This is, I think, the tire that I recommend for Lael for the Tour Divide. And then we have what we call the Endurance Plus. And that one is a really, really, really tough tire. That's the tire that you ride when, you really don't want to have a flat, when you know that the terrain is super, super tough. You do give up some speed. It's inevitable. But I would say it's one of the toughest tires you'll find out there. And so what I never understood is how most tire makers offer so many different tread patterns that are mostly just cosmetic, but the same casing. Apart from a manufacturing perspective, of course, it makes sense. Making different casings is a lot of effort, and making them all the same makes more sense. But so we try to offer our tires, especially the models that are more for extreme riding, so the bigger sizes, in these 4 casings. So for example, if I'm riding the Oregon Outback, I'm going to choose the extra light because the rocks there are relatively small. It's relatively smooth. All I need is extra volume, so I don't sink into the ground as much. But if you're riding the Tour Divide, I would say depends on the rider again. If you're a rider who's relatively light on the equipment, the Endurance is a great tire. If you're somebody who really thrashes the equipment, or if you're heading to somewhere like maybe the Baja Divide or something where conditions are terrible, you're gonna be better on the Endurance Plus. And so you get the advantages of the tread pattern, the advantages of all that, with a choice of different tires. You could even run one on the rear and one on the front if you feel like you're more likely to, say, cut the rear tire. Although in my experience, that's not really the case.
Interesting. And so, would you say the Endurance Plus casing would be maybe just a little bit more harsh of a ride quality, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it's because comfort and speed are so related. The more comfort you have on a tire that just basically floats over the road irregularities or the trail irregularities, you have a lot more speed. So as the tire gets stiffer, I mean, that's why we ride air in our tires in the first place. Otherwise we could just ride soft rubber tires and never worry about flats and sidewalk cuts. Unfortunately, I don't think you would ever get to Steamboat Springs even.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
I will say that the extra light tires are an absolute joy to ride. I've always been kind of stubborn, like I don't need light tires and they're not reliable. And then I did this Mount Lemmon challenge and I rode the extra light tires with tubes, which I haven't done in years. And I was just having like the time of my life.
Sweet.
It was just like on the same terrain, I just felt like I was flying. So it's worth it. It's worth it to ride extra light tires if, you're not going that far, you're not that concerned about overall time, you have the time to fix a flat, it's just like for the experience of it, just do it. It's fun. And then make conservative choices for other situations. But I think like changing equipment, it's just going to kind of change the way you look at riding and the experience you're having overall.
Awesome.
And I think there's also always the sort of game theory calculation of how much time do you gain versus how much time do you spend fixing. Now, good, like I ride extra light tires. I didn't have a flat, but even if I did have a flat, I probably save about an hour on the 1,200 kilometer, 760 mile ride, just riding the faster tires. Compared to the standards. And I can fix a flat in an hour. But on the other hand, I totally can see Lael, where she says, if I have a flat on day 10, it's going to ruin my whole day. And you don't want that.
Interesting.
So it's a different question. It's a different personality too. And so, that was really the interesting part working with Lael, because I said, why don't you ride the extra lights on the Tour Divide? And she says, no way.
I'm not going to do it.
And and I understand that. That's where the dialogue comes in, where we're all different people. We have different mentalities, different. And honestly, I mean, I've ridden 760 miles nonstop, but not 2,750.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on terrain, because it's like Neil and I were both at DKXL last year, and I mean, I saw like at least 6 people on the side of the road fixing flats at different times. And I'm like, okay, well, did that lightweight tire save you, or was it like really a problem? And so it's like, well, look at that terrain, sharp rocks, maybe a heavier tire, even maybe a bigger tire, but then you're like, okay, Oregon Outback, it's pretty fast, smooth. Like you don't need it, or Alaska in general. It's like, you don't need it. It's like, people here don't even run tubeless most of the time because they never get flats on tubes. So they're like, all right, I don't need it. So I guess every ride's going to be a bit different, but everybody wants to get away with like the most fun tires they can. It's like,
but I think
that's
your point
make the ride better.
You made a good point about the width. A lot of people still think that the narrow tire rolls faster. That's absolutely not the case off-road. Just like a suspension bike goes downhill way faster than an unsuspended bike because you don't have that vibration loss.
Right.
And so you also get a lot more puncture-resistant sidewall cut resistance with a wider tire because you run at lower pressures. When you think about it, if you take my big tire, it takes a lot more force to puncture that than if I have this inflated to 200 psi on a road tire, and I just go like this and it goes bam. So running the wider tire really has helped all of us to reduce our flats and problems. And I think that's something that especially the gravel racers still overlook. I remember they're always moving slightly wider. They were at 35, now they're at 38. I'm saying just go all the way and run a Fleecer Ridge and be done with it.
That's great.
Yeah. So Lael, I guess where would you not stop using this tire, but like what do you think the tire's limit is as far as some of the rides you do, maybe some of the bikepacking races? I guess you've ridden the Arizona Trail. Like, would you take it on a ride, a route like that?
No, I actually want to ride like a 2.6 on the Arizona Trail.
Okay.
I want like this big tire with tons of traction. Also, just to kind of compensate for my mountain bike skills, which are terrible. I'm like, I would much rather take like this big burly tire and then, plug along on the pavement with it, but then have it for like this rocky, rough terrain and have something more forgiving for that. So I wouldn't use this for that. I'm sure a different rider. I mean, people are still racing that on hardtails. I would never do that again either. I'm like, no way. Yeah. So I wouldn't use it for these ultra single track races generally. And then on the other end of it, it's like, I like riding up Mount Lemmon, and that's all on road. So I wouldn't ride it for that either because you can ride a slick. Yep. But then I'm like, well, if I'm going to jump on a bike and I'm going to ride it for 1,000 or 2,000 miles, even this rougher stuff like Silk Road Mountain Race in Kyrgyzstan or some of these like rougher Jeep trails, it's like you have such a mix of terrain that I would definitely take it for that. Cool. Because you do want to feel good. The Silk Road Mountain Race had like 90 miles of pavement in the middle of it. I was like, oh, I definitely want to like blast through that and not be like slogging along. So it's always there is always different terrain over thousands of miles, but I think this is really well suited to most of it.
Okay, cool. Good to know. All right, so Fleecer Ridge tire. Jan, when are they available? A lot of people have the 650 question. Are they going to be available in 650B? And you already mentioned that they're going to be available in the 4 casing options?
Yes. The 4 casings, the tires are available today. We just basically we got them last week and we put them in the warehouse and everything. They're available on the website now. Bike shops are getting them soon. Internationally, I know you have a lot of listeners or viewers all over the world. The distributors are getting them too. So, it takes a little while, especially currently shipping is not quite as fast as we'd like sometimes, but definitely it's available. 650B is a good question. Somewhere here I have we do have the Juniper Ridge, which was sort of the first really big tire we made with a similar tread pattern. It's about, we call it 48, but it's really about 51 millimeters. But I do feel, just like Lael says, those extra 4 or 5 millimeters would help a lot. When you calculate the air volume, it's actually quite significant. So I can see a bigger 650B tire in the future. Not sure when. We need to amortize the molds. The other thing is we don't like making 2 tires at once because we want to first find out, does it work? Rather than, if this one is a complete failure, or just sometimes we learn stuff. Like, from the Juniper Ridge, we got the idea of the noise canceling. So we said, why not? If we had made both at the same time, they'd be the same tire.
Right.
So we're going to move forward with new projects, and yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities.
Cool. And what's the MSRP? I didn't mention that.
The standard casing, I think, is 74. The extra light and endurance is 89, and the endurance plus is 94.
Okay.
A lot of stuff goes in the endurance plus.
Sure. Cool. Sweet. I guess just I do want to take a few questions from folks that have actually commented. But real quick, before we do that, Jan, is there anything in the pipeline? I know you maybe just hinted to something, but maybe not.
I'm not going to show you what's around here too much. Okay. Lael already has indicated that she has some needs that need to be addressed, so maybe we'll work on that. I have a cute little project that we just got, which is an extra light musette bag. And, usually musette bags are made from cotton. This one is from sil nylon. It's usually used for the ultralight bags we use for packing our bikes when we travel in Japan on the trains. And, so often we are traveling and we have each bag carefully packed with this and that and that. And then we get to a town and there's a great bakery. And we want to buy, 2 more chocolate croissants or something. So having this bag, I don't know what it weighs, like 15 grams or something. Yeah. And you just unfold it and sling it over your back, and you can, enjoy your croissant on the way out of town. So I'm quite excited about that.
Cool. Awesome. Cool. All right. And Lael, how are you faring without racing bikes? I know you talked about doing the Tour Divide and other races and all that.
So no big race efforts, but I'm just up riding the Alaskan roads. I'm pumped about that. And I'm actually doing an Everest challenge on Saturday, I think.
Cool.
And then I've gotten to go bike camping with my 8-year-old nephew. And so I'm like doing stuff with my family, but then the days are so long that I get to go for a huge ride myself, then go for a family ride, then do something else. I'm like, this is great. It feels like endless, but nothing competitive. But in some ways, it's kind of every now and then it's good to have a little breathing room for that. It's like just ride for the love of riding. Yeah. Don't worry about the results. And then it's like you can ride fast whenever you want to, and you don't have to have like a stamp on that or like a winning thing. But I don't know. How are you doing, Neil? Are you sad to not be competing?
This whole, I am, of course. It was nice, like doing the winter stuff, the winter ultras, because that was like good prep for the big Tour Divide year for me. And I had like an inkling that it wasn't going to happen, and then the news got worse and worse and worse, and then even I think just today they announced that the border is not going to be open until like July, the Canadian U.S. border.
You can still do a time trial.
Yeah. So either that, or I honestly, like, I can wait a year too. I really love the idea of racing at the start with everybody. It's something that is kind of part of the Tour Divide. So for me at least.
But it's really weird to be out there solo.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big challenge too. You're not being pushed by anyone. So
and then if the weather's bad or the conditions are bad, you're the only one dealing with it.
Yeah.
It's like,
exactly.
But different. Oh yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. But I mean, this whole YouTube thing has kind of launched because of the this whole coronavirus thing. So
great work with that.
Kind of an upside for sure. All right, so let's just answer a question here. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background there. This one came up, and this is actually a great question. So how does rim width influence the tire performance, say a 23 versus 25, or maybe even a 30 mil internal rim width? Maybe Jan, if you want to take that one on.
It's a really good question because especially in mountain biking, people often say that you want the tire and rim to sort of be well matched. So you get a U-shaped tire profile, and the tire can stand on its sidewalls more. So you don't rely on the air pressure as much for holding it up. And in theory, you get better handling and so on. But with a supple tire, it really doesn't matter so much because it's all air pressure anyway. And you need to run a slightly higher tire pressure just because the tire otherwise collapses. You know, you can't run a Fleecer Ridge at like 15 PSI. It just doesn't work. And it doesn't need that because you're only riding on air anyway. So really for these tires, it doesn't matter. It's just like a tubular for cyclocross where you have basically zero rim width. There's nothing holding up the sides and it still works great. So how to say? I'm not sure. At least with our tires, we say rim width doesn't matter too much. Of course, you don't want to get too narrow. Otherwise, you just have this huge tire ballooning over a very narrow rim. And you don't want to get too wide because otherwise the tire tends to blow off more easily.
Okay.
But
and that
too wide
actually
means wider than the tire. So, you know, with a 55, you could go to a 40 millimeter rim width and it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay. And this is a good follow-up question. So how does rider weight kind of come into play with different casings? Is there like a weight limit or anything like that? And I'm going to actually remove this just so we can see each other.
There's no real weight limit because what we found is that it's not so much the weight of the rider, but more the riding style. You know, some people sit light on their bike and the bike bounces around under them all over the place. And they can ride the lightest tires ever. I mean, Natsuko here, my partner, she rides a 30 millimeter tire on gravel roads. And it's just amazing. The whole bike moves like a foot side to side. It's just no problem. I couldn't do that. So it really depends more on the rider. And in the end, I think, like Lael said, we all experiment with what works for us. And we need to figure it out, you know, maybe try an extra light. If it doesn't work, well, you know, it's not a huge investment. It's not like you need to buy a new bike. You can go to a different casing or a different event. And it's sort of part of the fun, too, that for each event, you sort of need to guess. You know, of course, Lael, Tour Divide, she knows exactly where each rock lies. And she probably knows this corner, I need to go a little bit to the left to avoid the big rock. And if somebody moves it, it's a problem. But otherwise, you know, you sort of think, OK, what am I expecting and what can I run? And if you misjudge it, well, you know, it's all part of the game plan.
Cool. Well, it's been an hour. We've talked about tires for about an hour. Wow. No, that's great. I'm sure we can even continue to talk about it, but I think this is a really great stopping point for now. So thank you two so much for joining us and speaking and sharing your wisdom and knowledge. It's obviously, this is really great, and we've had a ton of people watch, and we'll continue to have people watch on YouTube here. So thank you so much. And everybody out there, if you guys haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button. That will just help ensure each one of our videos pops up in your feed. And as always, until next time, pedal further. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.